Generations of Native children stolen, taken away to places they didn't know, with people they never met, who spoke a language they had never heard. Native communities silenced, children abused, emotionally, physically, and sexually abused, forced into hard labor, some left for dead in unmarked graves. And for those who did return home, they were wounded in body and in spirit, trauma and shame passed down through generations.
Throughout American history, Native American culture has been dismantled by both the U.S. government and its citizens. This effort to erase Indigenous identity became especially clear when the passage of the Dawes Act in 1887. This law divided communal Native lands into individual plots, forcing Native Americans to adopt to a white Euro-American lifestyle promoting assimilation. A major tool in this effort was the creation of boarding schools for Indigenous children. One of the most popular and influential was the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania, opened in 1879. Its motto, "Kill the Indian and Save the Man," revealed its purpose: to strip Native children of their culture and force them to conform to white society. Children, some as young as 5, were taken from their homes and transported by ship, train, or stagecoach to Carlisle. They were forbidden from speaking their languages, wearing traditional clothing, or practicing their culture. They were taught to behave accordingly to the white American values. Despite these efforts, many students resisted. One of the first students at Carlisle, Ernest Knockoffs, tried to preserve his language and clothing, even though it led to punishment. He died at 18 from diphtheria, but his resistance symbolized the strength of cultural identity. Conditions at Carlisle were harsh. More than 973 children are confirmed to have died in U.S. boarding schools, many from disease and abuse. At Carlisle, overcrowded dorms and lack of medical care led to deadly outbreaks. Students were punished for any signs of their heritage. Parents, many of whom never wanted their children to attend these in the first place, often lost them forever, either to death or forced cultural transformation. The most haunting image of Tom Torlino, a Navajo student, is his before photo. He wears his tribe's traditional clothing. Just 3 years later, in the after photo, he is unrecognizable. A powerful visual of how deeply the schools changed children's identities. Carlisle didn't just impact those who attended. Generations later, descendants still feel the loss of the cultural acknowledge and tradition. Tragically, the Carlisle model was praised and copied across the country, including Wisconsin. The legacy, "Kill the Indian and Save the Man," still echoes today. In Wisconsin, some of the darkest chapters of Indigenous history were written behind the walls of the boarding schools. St. Joseph's Indian Industrial School opened in 1893 in Keshena, just 46 miles from Green Bay. It wasn't government-run, it was run by the church. And it was isolated, more than any other school in Wisconsin. The staff feared children would return to their native ways, so they cut them off entirely. No family visits, no familiar languages, just white culture. All day, every day. The children resented it. They were homesick, alone, and slowly losing the pieces of who they were. In Lac Des Flambeaux, the Good Shepherd Industrial School claimed to serve troubled girls or orphans, but it operated more like a low-security prison. Many girls later reported sexual abuse. They were told if they spoke up, they'd be punished by God, by man, or both. These threats were echoed in schools across America. Haywood Boarding School operated for 33 years and enrolled more than 13,000 children. One of them was a girl named Blanche. She and her 2 sisters were taken without their parents' knowledge. The school was crowded, the beds too small. Bells dictated every part of their day. When to wake up, when to eat, when to sleep. Their hair was shaved. Violence was constant. Blanche's sister was abused by an older student. Children who tried to run away were locked in a basement jail cell, fed only bread, water, and some were even chained to their beds. This wasn't just emotional violence, it was spiritual, cultural, and legal. The First Amendment promises freedom of religion and speech, and yet Indigenous children were forbidden to speak their languages, forced into Christianity, and their sacred traditions erased. These schools tried to silence generations, but today we tell their stories, not to dwell on the pain, but to acknowledge it, to learn and to heal, we remember, so that forgetting is never again an option.
Even after the boarding schools closed, the damage didn't end. For many Indigenous people, the trauma didn't just affect them, it reached into future generations. Language, ceremony, family bonds, everything that made their cultures whole had been disrupted, silenced, or nearly destroyed. And yet, instead of being supported and healing, Native communities were forced to fight to get back what should have never been taken. They didn't just lose rights, they had to reclaim them one painful step at a time. In 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act gave Native Americans U.S. citizenship, but that didn't mean equal rights. Even with citizenship, many were still denied the right to vote or govern their own lives. It wasn't until 1978, less than 50 years ago, that the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed, finally allowing Indigenous people to openly practice their own religions and ceremonies. For generations, these sacred practices had to be hidden away, done in secret or not at all. But the most powerful part of the story isn't the laws, it's the people. The burden of protecting Native culture was passed into the hands of those who survived. Many didn't ask for that responsibility, but they took it on anyway.
Today I will be interviewing
Mariah Summers, and I am the Oneida Youth Enrichment Service advocate.
So how do you think the Indigenous community fought back, and is it still fighting to recover the loss of rights and culture?
We will always be fighting to obtain that, and I think my auntie actually said it really well. It kind of reminds her of like when you break a mirror, like and it's like shattered and everything, and you never, like, you can put it back together, but it's not going to be whole, like it's not going to be the same. But I think it's our responsibility to try.
That responsibility, preserving what remains and reviving what was lost, still lives in Native communities today. It's in the elders teaching language classes, in the parents raising their kids to know their ancestors' songs, and in the youth reconnecting with the traditions stolen from their grandparents. And even though it's beautiful, it's also deeply unfair. No one should have to fight to speak the language of their people. No one should have to dig through history books and court cases just to reclaim their identity. No one should have to prove that their culture matters. But Indigenous people do it anyway because they have to, because their ancestors couldn't, because their children deserve better. There's power in that, and there's pride. But the pride comes with pain, because every celebration of culture today is a reminder of what had to be endured to get here. The stories passed down aren't just of dances or teachings. They're stories of loss, resistance, and survival. People like Tammy Swarzinski, who said, "The more we educate ourselves about what happened to our ancestors, the more people can forgive themselves." That kind of forgiveness doesn't come easy. It takes truth, it takes openness, and it takes honoring the responsibility that so many carry, not just for their families, but for their entire nations. So now, Indigenous people continue to stand up, not just for recognition, but for restoration, for healing, for dignity, and for the right to exist without being erased. It's hopeful, yes, but it's also heartbreaking that this fight was ever necessary. Still, every time a child learns their native language, every time a drum beat echoes at a powwow, every time a story is passed down around a fire, the culture lives on, not because it was protected by law, but because it was protected by love, and also because of those who choose to carry the weight of their people's survival so that no one would ever forget who they are.
For too long, the stories of Indigenous children, ripped from their families, stripped of their language, their names, their identity, have been buried beneath silence. But history isn't meant to be hidden, it's meant to be faced. National History Day is not just a project, it's a promise to speak the truth, to honor survival, and never look away. By uncovering the legacy of Indigenous boarding schools, we're not just remembering, we're reclaiming voices, reclaiming rights. When we choose truth, we shape a future that is stronger, louder, and just. Because when we educate, we empower, and when we learn, we change the future. We carry these stories not as a burden, but as a responsibility, so that history is never repeated and justice is never forgotten.